Welcome to the Thinking Cast, and today we're going to discuss Frankenstein, or The Modern Prometheus, by Mary Shelley.
It's a title that it feels monumental, doesn't it? It's probably one of the most famous, or at least most recognizable novels ever written in English, and yet somehow it remains one of the most profoundly misunderstood books out there.
Oh, absolutely. It's almost a victim of its own success. I feel like if you stopped 100 people on the street and you asked them to picture Frankenstein, 99 of them? They're going to picture a tall green guy with a flat head.
The bolts in the neck?
The bolts in the neck, right. The stiff-legged walk, the groaning. But that's a caricature, and it's not even close to what we're actually dealing with in the novel.
Not even remotely. For one thing, and this is the classic point that literary nerds, myself included, love to make at parties, Frankenstein is the name of the creator.
Right. Victor Frankenstein.
The creature itself is nameless, which is a hugely important detail we'll get into. But more than that, the book isn't just a monster movie script waiting to happen. It's not just a spooky campfire story. It is this incredibly dense, complex, you called it a stack before, and I love that. It's a stack of philosophy, of cutting-edge 19th century science, of biography, and just raw existential terror.
It's like a philosophical lasagna. You slice into it thinking you're just getting this one gothic horror story, and then suddenly you hit a layer of bioethics, and then a layer of gender politics, and then racial theory. It just keeps going deeper.
A philosophical lasagna. I'm going to have to use that one. But yes, that's exactly right. And I think that's our mission for this deep dive, really, to unpack why. Why is a story that was written by a teenager, and we have to keep reminding ourselves she was 18 when she started this, why is a book from 1818 still at the center of our conversations today?
And not just in literature classes. We're talking about artificial intelligence, about genetic engineering,
bioethics, gender dynamics, race, responsibility. It's all there. It's shockingly prescient.
It is. The fact that an 18-year-old in the early 1800s wrote a book that feels like it's directly addressing the anxieties we have about ChatGPT and CRISPR, it's wild. So to understand how all of that found its way into one book, we have to look at the sources. We have to look at the environment. And I mean that literally, the actual weather that produced it.
The scientific feuds she was overhearing.
And the immense personal tragedy she was living through. You really can't separate this book from the life of Mary Shelley or the world she was in.
Context is absolutely everything with Frankenstein. The text is inseparable from the moment it was born.
So let's set that scene. We need to go to June 1816. We're in Switzerland, near Lake Geneva, the Villa Diodati. Now, when you see paintings of this place or you read descriptions, it sounds idyllic. Romantic, even.
You imagine these brilliant young writers. You've got Mary Godwin, who isn't Mary Shelley yet, Percy Bysshe Shelley, the great Lord Byron, his doctor, John Polidori, and you think they're on this amazing summer vacation.
Exactly. Sunny picnics, boating on the lake, writing poetry under the stars.
And that is precisely what it was not. Not even close. History sometimes calls this the haunted summer, but the grim reality was, well, it was apocalyptic.
Miserable is the word I've heard.
Miserable is an understatement. They called it the year without a summer. And this wasn't just a patch of bad luck or a few rainy weekends. This was a direct consequence of a global geological event.
Okay, let's pause on that because this is a key piece of the puzzle. It all starts with a volcano.
It does. In April of 1815, so the year before their trip, Mount Tambora in Indonesia had a catastrophic eruption.
And we need to really understand the scale here. This isn't just any eruption.
No, this is the largest volcanic eruption in recorded human history. The sheer volume of sulfur dioxide and ash that it pumped into the stratosphere is almost unimaginable. This massive ash cloud spread around the entire globe and essentially acted like a veil.
It blocked out the sun.
It reflected the sun's radiation back into space, and the result was that global temperatures plummeted.
It's just incredible to think about. A volcano erupts in Indonesia, and it completely ruins a summer vacation for a group of poets in Switzerland. The interconnectedness of the planet right there.
It meant a lot more than a vacation. The impact was devastating. Across Europe, across North America, crops failed on a massive scale. There was snow in New England in June. In Europe, you had widespread famine, food riots.
They were starving.
They were. And disease followed. There were typhus outbreaks. It genuinely felt to many people like the end of the world. The sky had this permanent, weird, sulfurous fog. The sunsets were supposedly spectacular, these lurid, painterly things, but the days were dark and cold.
So when we read the book and Victor Frankenstein starts his work on a dreary night in November, we shouldn't just think of that as a spooky gothic trope for effect. They're literally trapped inside by a hostile, dreary climate.
Exactly. Mary describes it in her introduction as a wet, ungenial summer. It was just cold, dark, and rainy, day after day, week after week. The whole atmosphere was heavy with this sense of doom and gloom.
So they're stuck indoors. They can't go sailing. They can't go hiking. What do?
You have to find a way to entertain yourselves. And they had a copy of a book called Phantasmagoriana. It was a collection of German ghost stories that had been translated into French, and they would read them aloud to each other.
To pass the time, huddled by the fire, I imagine?
By candlelight, probably with a fair amount of laudanum and wine to help things along. And this leads to the famous challenge. After days of reading these scary stories, Lord Byron proposes a contest. He says, "We will each write a ghost story."
Talk about a high-pressure situation. You're sitting there with Lord Byron and Percy Shelley, who are already two of the most famous poets of the Romantic Age. And they say, okay, your turn. Write something scary.
It was a very high-stakes creative writing group, to put it mildly, and, most of them got started. John Polidori, who was Byron's personal physician, a man who was, by all accounts, constantly being bullied and belittled by Byron, he actually started writing a story that would eventually become The Vampire.
Which is a huge deal in its own right. That story is basically the precursor to Bram Stoker's Dracula.
It is. So think about that. In one summer, in one house, trapped by this volcanic winter, you have the birth of the modern vampire myth and the modern myth of the reanimated constructed human. It's an astonishingly productive summer.
Incredible. But Mary, she didn't have an idea right away, did she? She was stuck.
No, she struggled. She describes how every morning they would ask her, "Have you thought of a story?" And every morning she had to give the mortifying negative. It was becoming embarrassing for her. Here she is, the daughter of two of the most famous radical intellectuals of the day, Mary Wollstonecraft and William Godwin, surrounded by these literary giants, and she's got writer's block.
Until the waking dream. That's how she put it.
Yes. She describes this moment so vividly in the 1831 introduction to the novel. She says it wasn't quite sleep, but it wasn't quite being awake either. It was a hypnagogic state. She had been up late listening to Byron and Shelley discuss the principle of life.
What were they talking about?
They were talking about galvanism, about the possibility of reanimating a corpse. They were discussing the experiments of Erasmus Darwin. So these ideas were swirling in her head. And when she finally laid her head on her pillow, the image came to her.
And what did she see? What was that core image?
She saw a pale student of unhallowed arts kneeling beside the thing he had put together. She saw this hideous phantasm of a man stretched out on the floor. And then, with the working of some powerful engine, she saw it show signs of life and stir with an uneasy, half-vital motion.
That phrase, half-vital motion, has always chilled me to the bone. It's so specific. It's not glorious life. It's something wrong, something that's moving but isn't quite alive in the way we understand it.
It's deeply uncanny. And she says she opened her eyes in terror. The idea had possessed her so thoroughly that she felt a thrill of fear, and then came the thought, if I could write a story which would make the reader feel what I felt then, I would have succeeded. That was the seed.
But as we said, that seed didn't just fall on barren ground. Her imagination didn't just pull this out of thin air. Mary Shelley's life, even at that young age, had been just steeped in death and loss.
Profoundly so. We have to talk about the biography here because it's not just a story about creating life. It's a story born from the trauma of giving and losing life. Her mother was Mary Wollstonecraft, the foundational feminist philosopher who wrote A Vindication of the Rights of Woman.
An absolute giant of intellect.
A giant. But she died just 11 days after giving birth to Mary. She died from puerperal fever, an infection contracted during the birth. So Mary grows up her whole life with this ghost of a mother, this brilliant woman she never knew, who effectively died in the act of giving her life. Can you imagine that psychological burden? My existence cost my mother her life.
That's a heavy, heavy weight to carry. And then by the time she is to Villa Diodati writing Frankenstein at 18, she has already lost a child of her own.
Yes. Her first child with Percy, a daughter named Clara, was born premature and died just a few weeks later. It was a deeply traumatic experience for her. She actually wrote about a recurring dream she had in her journal.
What was the dream?
She wrote, "Dreamt that my little baby came to life again, that it had only been cold and that we rubbed it before the fire and it lived."
Oh, wow. That is just heartbreaking. So you have this dream of reanimating a lost child through warmth, through effort. combined with the guilt over her mother's death.
And it all gets channeled into this story. A story about birth and death being horribly intertwined. A story about the creation of life turning into a horror show. The critic Ellen Moores wrote a brilliant essay arguing that Frankenstein is a birth myth.
What does she mean by that?
She means it's a phantasmagoria of the nursery. It's taking all the anxieties of pregnancy, childbirth, and postpartum depression, the fear that your body is out of control, the fear that the child you produce might be monstrous, the fear of giving birth only to have the child die. And she's projecting it all into this gothic, masculine story of creation.
So it's not just a scientific horror story. It's a deeply personal story about the horrors of procreation from a female perspective.
Exactly. But it was also very much a scientific story. She wasn't just writing a diary entry in code. She was deeply, deeply embedded in the scientific atmosphere of her time. And I think for modern readers, it's easy to assume this was all just, magic or alchemy. But she was really tapping into the most cutting-edge, controversial debates of her day.
Okay, so let's unpack that science.
Yeah.
Because it's fundamental to what Victor Frankenstein is doing.
Yeah.
There's this huge intellectual war going on in London, right?
A massive one. It was called the vitalism versus materialism debate. And it was a battle for the very definition of life.
So lay this out for us. Who are the main fighters in this intellectual war?
Well, in one corner, representing vitalism, you had a very prominent surgeon named John Abernethy. His argument, which was the more traditional and religiously acceptable one, was that life requires something extra, a super added force.
Like a soul.
A soul, a divine spark, a vital principle. He sometimes described it as a subtle fluid, maybe like electricity, that's distinct from the physical body. So you could have all the organs perfectly assembled, but without this vitality, you're just a pile of meat. It's the ghost in the machine idea.
Right. It keeps a separation between the physical and the spiritual.
Exactly. It's a very comforting view because it leaves plenty of room for God and the soul in an afterlife. But in the other corner, you had William Lawrence. And this is fascinating because Lawrence was actually the Shelley's personal physician.
So they knew him. They were hearing these ideas firsthand.
They were, and Lawrence was a radical materialist.
And what was the materialist argument? What was he claiming?
He argued that life is nothing more than the working function of the body's organization. There is no ghost. There is no superadded spark. Life is simply what happens when you assemble the parts correctly and get the chemistry right. He famously said that the mind is a function of the brain in the same way that digestion is a function of the stomach.
That sounds incredibly modern to us now, but in the early 1800s, that must have been a bombshell.
It was explosive. It was deeply blasphemous. Lawrence wasn't just saying biology is interesting. He was directly attacking the foundations of Christian theology. If the mind is just the brain, then when the brain dies, the soul dies with it. There is no afterlife.
And what happened to him?
He was savaged for it. The Lord Chancellor of England actually refused to protect the copyright of his lectures because they were deemed seditious and blasphemous. He essentially lost his career for a while over this. He was forced to publicly retract his ideas.
So when Mary Shelley writes Frankenstein, and she has Victor stitching together body parts and using chemistry and electricity to animate them, she's not just making up sci-fi. She is actively engaging with the most radical, dangerous, scientific idea of her time.
She is dramatizing the materialist viewpoint. Victor doesn't pray over the body. He doesn't perform a magical ritual. He builds a biological machine, and he makes the machine run. This was a terrifying, godless idea at the time because it suggested that human beings were just complex mechanisms that could potentially be built or hacked.
And speaking of hacking the body, that brings us to galvanism, the famous twitching frog legs.
Luigi Galvani, yes. Back in the late 1700s, he was an Italian physician who discovered that if you applied an electrical spark to the nerve of a dissected frog, its leg would kick. He called it animal electricity. And it created this huge sensation because it seemed to suggest that electricity was the very force of life itself.
But it didn't stop with frogs, did it?
Yeah.
This is where it gets really gruesome.
It gets much, much more gruesome. You have to bring in Giovanni Aldini, who was Galvani's nephew. Aldini was a showman. He took these private laboratory experiments and turned them into public spectacles. He wanted to prove that galvanism worked on humans.
And I've read about the George Forster experiment. It honestly sounds like something straight out of a horror movie.
It's pure horror. I want you to just picture this scene. It's January 1803 in London. A man named George Forster, a convicted murderer, has just been hanged at Newgate Prison. His body is cut down while it's still warm and immediately carted over to the Royal College of Surgeons.
And there's an audience.
There's an audience of doctors, scientists, and morbidly curious onlookers. Aldini is there with a massive voltaic pile, a primitive battery, and they get to work on the corpse.
What do they do?
They attach conducting rods to different parts of the body, one to the mouth, one to the ear. When they completed the circuit, the contemporary accounts say the jaw of the dead man began to quiver, the muscles of his face were horribly contorted, and then the left eye actually opened.
I cannot imagine seeing that in 1803. You would think the man was coming back to life. You'd think you were witnessing a miracle or a demonic possession.
People were terrified. One of the assistants supposedly was so shocked by what he saw that he died of a heart attack shortly after the event. Aldini kept going. He made the corpse's legs kick, made its arm raise up and clench its fist. It completely blurred the line between life and death. It looked like reanimation.
And this is exactly what Victor is doing in his lab. He's taking it one step further. He's not just making a dead body twitch, he's building a new one from scratch.
And look at his education in the book. He starts out obsessed with the old alchemists, Agrippa, Paracelsus, who are searching for the elixir of life. It's all very mystical. But then he goes to the University of Ingolstadt, and his professor tells him that's all nonsense. He needs to study modern chemistry.
So he pivots from magic to science.
He merges the two. He takes the grand, godlike ambition of the alchemist and applies the new practical tools of materialist science and galvanism to achieve it.
Okay, so we have the apocalyptic weather, the personal trauma, and the cutting-edge science. That's the primordial soup the novel comes out of. Now let's look at the book itself, because structurally, it is not what people expect. It's not just Victor's diary.
No, and this is so crucial to understanding it. It's a frame narrative. The best way to think of it is like a set of Russian nesting dolls or those Chinese boxes, one inside the other.
So what's the outermost box? Who do we meet first?
The outer layer, the first voice we hear, belongs to Captain Robert Walton. He's an Arctic explorer, and the novel is technically a series of letters he's writing to his sister, Margaret Saville, back in England.
And a lot of readers, I think, tend to just skim over Walton's letters to get to the monster stuff. But he's actually a really important character.
He's a perfect parallel for Victor. Walton is consumed by ambition. He wants to be the first person to find a passage across the North Pole or discover the secret of the Earth's magnetism. He writes to his sister, and this is a direct quote, that he would sacrifice his fortune, his existence, and every hope just to achieve this great purpose. He's willing to sacrifice his entire crew for glory.
He is another man trying to conquer nature for his own ego. He's Victor before the fall.
He's on the exact same path. He's the reader's warning. And while his ship is trapped in the Arctic ice, he sees something bizarre. He sees this gigantic figure on a dog sled racing across the ice in the distance, and then a day or so later, his crew finds another man, emaciated, near death, drifting on a single slab of ice. And that man is Victor Frankenstein.
So Walton takes him aboard, and Victor, seeing a kindred spirit in Walton's ambition, decides to tell him his story as a warning.
Right. So that's the second layer, the middle doll. The bulk of the novel is Victor telling his story to Walton. But then, right in the literal and figurative heart of the book, we get the innermost layer. The creature finds Victor and tells his story to him.
And I think the creature's narrative is the part that surprises first-time readers the most. He's not this groaning, monosyllabic brute.
Not at all.
He's articulate. He's sensitive. He quotes Milton.
He is incredibly eloquent. He's a philosopher in his own right. He's a true romantic hero in some ways. He learns to speak and read by secretly observing a family, the de Lacys, in a cottage, and he finds a lost satchel of books in the woods.
And what a reading list for what is essentially a toddler.
It's a heavy-duty syllabus. He reads Paradise Lost, Plutarch's Lives, and Goethe's The Sorrows of Young Werther. And each one teaches him something crucial about being human. Well, Paradise Lost gives him his theology, his cosmology. He reads it, and he identifies with both Adam, the first of his kind, but even more so with Satan, the fallen angel who is rejected by his creator. Werther gives him his emotional vocabulary, this deep sense of melancholy and longing for connection. And Plutarch gives him a sense of history, of society, of great men and their deeds.
So he's building his own humanity out of literature. Let's walk through the main arc of the plot. Victor, obsessed, creates this being from parts he's stolen from charnel houses and slaughterhouses. He spends months on it, ignoring his family, his friends, his own health. He thinks it's going to be beautiful.
He specifically tells us he selected beautiful features, the
Yeah.
lustrous black hair, the pearly white teeth, but he's only looking at the individual parts, not the whole. He's so focused on the details that he misses the bigger picture.
And then comes the moment of truth, the moment it wakes up.
This is the turning point of the entire novel. It's a dreary night in November. The rain is pattering against the window panes, and the creature opens its dull yellow eye. And Victor, he doesn't shout, "It's alive," in triumph like in the movies.
What does he do?
He is instantly, utterly filled with breathless horror and disgust.
But why? He just spent 2 years of his life on this project. What is it about the living creature that repels him so much?
I think it's a profound case of the uncanny valley. The skin is a jaundiced yellow, and it's too tight. You can see the muscles and arteries working underneath, the watery eyes, the shriveled complexion. It's the wrongness of it. But I think on a deeper level, it's the sudden, crushing realization of what he has done. The beautiful dream of being a god crashes into the ugly reality of this thing.
So he runs away. He literally abandons his creation in its first moments of life.
He does worse than that. He goes to his bedroom, tries to sleep, has a nightmare about his dead mother, and then wakes up to find the creature standing by his bed, smiling at him and reaching out, and he flees the apartment. It's the most profound act of parental cowardice imaginable. He rejects his newborn child solely based on its appearance, and that single act of abandonment is the sin that triggers every tragedy that follows.
And the consequences are just brutal. The creature wanders off into the world, confused, and is met with horror and violence everywhere he goes. And eventually, that pain turns to rage, and he targets Victor's life.
It's a systematic and horrifyingly personal campaign of revenge. First, the creature finds Victor's angelic younger brother, William, playing in the woods. He kills him. And then, in a twist of real psychological cruelty, he takes a locket from William's body and plants it in the pocket of Justine Moritz, the family's beloved nanny.
And Justine is put on trial for the murder, and Victor knows. He knows she's innocent. He knows it was his monster. Does he speak up?
No. He remains silent. He's paralyzed by fear. He thinks if he tells the truth, people will think he's insane and lock him up. So he stands by and watches as this innocent young woman is convicted and executed. He allows 2 people to die to protect his reputation and his secret.
This is when the creature finally confronts him. They meet on a glacier in the Alps, a very dramatic setting, and the creature makes his case. He says that famous line, "I am malicious because I am miserable."
It's his central thesis. And he makes a demand. He wants Victor to create a female for him, a companion, someone as hideous as himself, so that he won't be alone in the world anymore.
And Victor surprisingly agrees at first.
He does. He feels a flicker of responsibility, of guilt. So he travels to the most remote part of the Orkney Islands in Scotland, this desolate, isolated place, and begins to build a female creature. But then, as he's looking at the half-finished body on his table, he just spirals into this paranoid panic.
What is he so afraid of this time?
He has a storm of what-ifs. What if she's 10 times more malignant than the male? What if she hates him? What if she rejects him and goes off on her own? And the worst fear of all, what if they do like each other? What if they have children? He has this vision of a race of devils that would populate the earth and destroy humanity.
So he destroys her.
In a fit of rage, he tears the female creature to pieces. And the male creature is watching through the window the whole time. It is an unbelievably violent and cruel scene. He doesn't just kill her, he dismembers her. He destroys the creature's only hope for happiness right before his eyes.
That is the moment the war truly begins. The creature lets out this howl of despair and makes that famous vow, "I will be with you on your wedding night."
And Victor, in his incredible self-absorption, assumes the creature means to kill him on his wedding night. So he spends the entire time leading up to his wedding to his beloved Elizabeth, thinking he's preparing for a one-on-one duel to the death.
He never once thinks that the creature might be planning a symmetrical revenge. "You destroyed my bride, so I will destroy yours."
Never crosses his mind. And that's exactly what happens. First, the creature kills Henry Clerval, Victor's best and only friend. And then on the wedding night, while Victor is foolishly patrolling the hallways of the inn with a pistol, the creature slips into the bedroom and strangles Elizabeth.
He leaves Victor utterly alone with nothing. Just like the creature, he has successfully dragged his creator down into his own private hell of isolation.
Precisely. And the rest of the novel is just this mad, obsessive chase across Europe and into the Arctic. Victor becomes the hunter pursuing the creature, who in turn is leading him on. And that's where Walton finds him, at the end of his life, his story, and his rope. He dies on Walton's ship.
It's such a profoundly tragic ending.
Yeah.
Walton finds the creature weeping over Victor's body. The creature expresses this deep remorse, claiming he was the slave, not the master of his passions. And then he leaps from the ship onto an ice raft and is carried away by the waves into darkness, vowing to burn himself to death at the North Pole.
It leaves the reader with so much to process. There's no clean resolution, just this immense sense of waste and tragedy. And the complexity of that ending, the creature's remorse mixed with his violence, allows us to look at the book through so many different critical lenses.
Let's start with a feminist lens. You mentioned Ellen Moore's earlier and her idea of the birth myth.
Yes, if you look at the text, there is a striking absence of functional mothers. Victor's mother, Caroline, dies early on from scarlet fever. Justine has a terrible relationship with her own mother. Elizabeth is an orphan. And of course, the creature is the ultimate motherless being. It is a world where women are either dead, passive, or victims.
It's a world dominated by men trying to do things without women.
Specifically, Victor is attempting to usurp the female role of reproduction. He wants to create life without the biological process, without the messiness of a woman's body. It's often been described by critics as a story about male womb envy.
He wants the glory of being a father to a new species, but he refuses to do any of the actual parenting.
Exactly. He wants the baby, but he doesn't want to change the diapers. Or in this case, he can't even stand to look at his baby because it isn't aesthetically pleasing. The novel seems to argue that a creation born solely of male ambition, without the maternal elements of nurturing, empathy, and care, is doomed to become a monster.
But let's go back to that scene in the Orkneys with the female creature. There's a darker aspect to the feminist reading there, isn't there? When he rips her apart.
There is. Think about his specific fears. He worries she might have her own will. She might not be controllable. He fears her reproductive power, the power to create a race of devils. He is terrified of female autonomy and female sexuality, untethered from male control.
So the destruction of the female body is a symbolic act of controlling female power.
It's an incredibly violent reassertion of patriarchal control. He can handle a male monster that's a physical threat he can fight, but a female monster who can think for herself and, crucially, who can reproduce, that is an existential threat to his world order. He performs what is essentially a violent retrospective abortion on this creature to prevent her from having any agency at all.
And when you connect that back to Mary Shelley's own life, the dangers of childbirth that killed her mother, her own traumatic experiences with pregnancy and infant loss, it feels like she's exploring the horror of a world where men try to take total control over the process of life itself.
It's hard not to see those echoes. Now, if we shift our perspective, there's another incredibly powerful way to read this book, especially today, and that's through the lens of post-colonialism and race.
This is one that I think modern readers pick up on almost immediately. The language used to describe the creature feels very charged.
It is. When Walton first sees the creature from his ship, he calls him a savage inhabitant. The physical description Victor gives, the yellow skin, the lustrous black hair, the straight black lips, these are all features that echo the kind of racialized, pseudoscientific language used in the 19th century to describe non-European peoples.
The creature is the ultimate other.
He is. And you can analyze the dynamic between Victor and the creature through the philosophy of Hegel, specifically his master-slave dialectic.
Okay, let's break that down because it sounds complicated, but it's actually a very powerful idea.
It is. Hegel's point is that a master is not a master simply because he holds a whip. He's only a master because the slave recognizes his authority. His identity as master is completely dependent on the slave's consciousness. So, in a strange way, the master is actually dependent on the slave. Now, apply that to Victor. He thinks he's the master, the creator. But by the end of the book, who is really in control?
The creature, completely. The creature is leading him, leaving him food, cutting marks in trees to guide him. He is dragging Victor across the continent and into the Arctic. The creature becomes the master, dictating Victor's every move, and Victor becomes the slave, bound by his obsession and his thirst for revenge.
The roles are completely reversed. And you can also bring in the work of Frantz Fanon, the great theorist of decolonization. He wrote a book called Black Skin, White Masks, which talks about the psychological damage of colonialism.
And how does that apply to the creature?
Fanon discusses the experience of the colonized subject who desires assimilation into the colonizer's world, but is constantly rejected based on his appearance, on his race. This is the creature's exact tragedy with the de Lacy family.
The family in the cottage that he observes for months.
Yes. He watches them, he learns their language, he comes to love them, he secretly helps them by gathering firewood. He thinks if I can just speak to them, if they can hear my rational, eloquent words, they will see past my deformity. They will see my soul.
He believes in the Enlightenment ideal, that reason and language will overcome prejudice.
But the moment the family actually sees him, they don't listen. They don't give him a chance. Felix, the son, attacks him violently. The women scream and faint. It's what the creature later calls the fatal prejudice. He realizes that no matter how articulate he is, no matter how benevolent his intentions are, his physical form condemns him in their eyes.
And that is the moment he snaps. I am malicious because I am miserable.
Fanon writes about this. When the oppressed person is denied their humanity over and over, when the door to assimilation is slammed in their face, the only outlet left can be a violent explosion. The creature isn't born a monster. He is made into one by a society that refuses to see him as human.
It's so tragic because he tries so hard to mimic them, to learn their culture from their books, but it's never enough.
And that concept of mimicry is key in post-colonial theory. He learns to speak and think like a highly educated European, but his body always betrays him. It's a tragedy of failed assimilation.
Now, there's a third lens that has become really prominent in more recent scholarship, which is queer theory and transgender studies.
This is a really fascinating and rich area of analysis. The critic Eve Sedgwick, in her foundational book Between Men, talked about homosocial desire. And if you look at Victor, his most intense, passionate, and obsessive relationships are all with men.
With Walton, with his best friend Clerval, and most of all, with the creature.
Absolutely. He consistently avoids and postpones his marriage to Elizabeth, but he is utterly consumed by the creature. He spends months laboring over this beautiful male body, selecting the features with what you could almost call the eye of a lover.
But then when it comes to life, that desire curdles into horror.
Sedgwick might call that homosexual panic. The erotic energy of creation turns into revulsion and terror at the reality of the animated male body. And, very importantly, when Victor destroys the female creature, he ensures that the central bond in his life remains exclusively between the two males, creator and creature. They are locked in this intensely intimate, violent chase to the death. They literally cannot quit each other.
And then there's the transgender reading, which comes from scholars like Susan Stryker.
Yes. Susan Stryker wrote a landmark essay called My Words to Victor Frankenstein, which is a foundational text in trans studies. And she reclaims the word monster as a site of power. She looks at the creature as a being whose body is different, a body that has been stitched together, surgically altered, and which defies the natural order.
Which has clear parallels to the trans experience of living in a body that society might deem unnatural or monstrous.
Precisely. Stryker points out that the creature is articulate, intelligent, and has a profound sense of self, but society refuses to recognize his identity. They won't even give him a name. They just call him fiend, wretch, monster. It's a fundamental refusal to acknowledge his personhood.
And Stryker argues that the creature's rage can be seen as a form of transgender rage, a powerful response to that erasure.
Yes. Instead of apologizing for being a monster, the creature eventually owns it. He finds his agency in his monstrosity. It's a really powerful way to read the text, giving voice to anyone who has been marginalized or made to feel monstrous because of their body.
It's just amazing how this one story can contain all of these different powerful interpretations. But we have to talk about why it feels so urgent right now. In the 2020s, we're not just reading it as a historical artifact, we're reading it because of AI.
The parallels are almost uncomfortably perfect. We are living, once again, in the age of the modern Prometheus.
Let's just quickly clarify that title. Prometheus was the titan from Greek myth who stole fire from the gods and gave it to humanity.
And he was punished eternally for it. He was chained to a rock, and an eagle came to eat his liver every single day. Victor Frankenstein steals the fire of life itself, a power that was supposed to belong only to God. And his punishment is to watch everyone he loves be destroyed and to live in absolute misery.
When we look at the development of artificial intelligence, we see what Isaac Asimov called the Frankenstein complex, this deep-seated cultural fear that our technological creations will rise up and destroy us.
But if you read the book carefully, the central warning isn't don't build the robot. The warning is don't be an irresponsible parent to the robot.
That is the crucial distinction. Victor is a deadbeat dad.
He is. The core ethical failure is not the act of creation, it's the act of abandonment. And if we apply that to modern AI, the question isn't just, Should we build large language models? The question is, how do we build them responsibly? How do we align them with human values? How do we avoid creating black box algorithms that we don't understand and then just letting them loose on the world without any thought to the consequences?
You hear tech leaders like Elon Musk using this exact language, talking about AI research as summoning the demon.
And just like Victor, so many are driven by what you could call the technological sublime, the sheer glory of the achievement. Victor says, a new species would bless me as its creator. He's doing it for the fame, for the ego. He's not stopping to think, what are the social consequences? What does this creature need? What are my duties to it?
And think about how we train AI. We feed it the entire internet, all of our knowledge, but also all of our biases, our hatred, our garbage. And then we act surprised when it says something toxic or biased. It's like Victor building the creature out of scraps from the graveyard in the charnel house and then being shocked that it wasn't an angel.
That is a brilliant analogy. We are stitching together the fragmented, often decaying parts of human consciousness found online and hoping that the result will be benevolent and wise. Victor's great failure was assuming that a well-built body would contain a good soul. Our great failure might be assuming that a well-built algorithm will have sound ethics.
And there's also the eco-critical angle, which brings us full circle back to the weather.
Yes, The Year Without a Summer. The novel is just soaked in climate anxiety. The creature is constantly associated with the raw, untamable forces of nature storms, glaciers, the frozen Arctic. He represents the return of the repressed nature. Victor thinks he can conquer and control the natural world, but in the end, nature, in the form of the creature in the Arctic ice, is what completely destroys him.
It's a profound warning for the Anthropocene. We can manipulate the climate, we can splice genes, we can split the atom, but we can't always control the consequences of our own cleverness.
Precisely. Whether we're talking about climate change, genetic engineering, or artificial intelligence, Frankenstein poses the same timeless question. Are we mature enough to take moral responsibility for the power we now possess, or are we just a bunch of brilliant children playing with fire?
So we've covered a lot of ground here. We've gone from Indonesian volcanoes to galvanism in London, from feminist birth myths to transgender rage, and all the way to the ethics of Silicon Valley.
It's a very heavy stack.
If you had to synthesize it, if you had to put a single label on it, what is the creature?
The creature is a mirror. That's why the book has survived for over 200 years and feels more relevant than ever. He reflects back whatever anxiety the reader or the culture brings to the text.
How do you mean?
If you're reading through a feminist lens, the creature is the abandoned child of a failed patriarchy. If you're reading through a post-colonial lens, he is the oppressed racial other. To a queer or trans scholar, he is the non-normative body demanding recognition. To the modern scientist, he is the unintended consequence of unchecked ambition. He becomes what we fear most.
And Victor is the universal failure of empathy.
He is. The ultimate tragedy of the book, the thing that makes it so heartbreaking, is that the creature could have been good. He says it himself. I was benevolent and good. Misery made me a fiend.
That's the line that always sticks with me. His monstrosity wasn't innate. It wasn't inevitable.
No. It was a choice made by his creator and then by society to reject him. The real monster in the book isn't the 8-foot-tall man with the yellow skin and the scars. The real monster is the fatal prejudice inside all of us that refuses to see the humanity in those who are different.
That is a powerful and frankly, a challenging thought to leave us on. We focus so much on the technology, the spark of life, the chemistry, the AI code, but maybe the real danger has always been the very human capacity for fear and rejection.
Well said.
Here's a final thought for you to chew on, listener. We always talk about Victor creating the monster, but in a very real way, the monster creates Victor. By the end of the novel, Victor has no identity left except as the hunter of the creature. He is entirely defined by his creation. It makes you wonder about our own relationship with technology. How much are we defined by the things we create? At what point do we stop owning them and they start owning us?
That's the question we're all living with now.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this discussion, consider liking the video and subscribing for more deep dives into the classics.